Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Genet Donaldson. I'm in downtown San Luis Obispo at the environmental center they call Eco Slow. Maybe that's part of a slow movement, but I think it's a movement forward. I have three guests who've been involved with some really interesting things around energy. So I'm going to introduce, catch the paper here, Ken Smokoska, who's with the Sierra Club in their renewable energy initiatives and climate change initiatives.
Correct.
Right? Thank you for joining me. Aeron, Arlin, Genet, right? Let's get all of this. Who's the planning manager with the San Luis Obispo Air Pollution Control District and also chair of the Central Coast Clean Cities Coalition, which we may hear about some more. And Nick Alter, who's on the board of directors with the Slow Green Build organization. And also, all of you, I think, are part of the Smart Energy Solutions Summit that just happened recently in your community. So let's start with, that was a day-long event, yeah? What got that started?
Well, it was seeded by the Sierra Club. And actually, it was the initiative, I think, principally of Ken, who travels up and down the coast and has been, I think, the principal instigator of this concept. What the Sierra Club did, though, was very effective in not making this a Sierra Club event. What was important in this initiative and getting something going within our community was to bring the whole community together, something that would cross political and philosophical boundaries, something that would involve the business community, because we felt that was a very key element of of the success of any program we might undertake. So right from the get-go, we decided that a coalition needed to be formed to bring both the business community, the environmental community, the university, and our county government into the process.
What was the purpose of this event? What did you want to have happen out of the summit?
I think the main thing was, there were two things that came to mind, and kick in with some of the things that you had.
Sure, I think probably the primary reason was to introduce the community to community choice law. And what community choice law is it's Assembly Bill 117, which was sponsored by Carol Migden in San Francisco in 2002 in the midst of the energy crisis. So it was created to allow communities to control their own destiny as far as local power generation.
What does that mean? I mean, how does that work?
How does that work? Well, what it does is it allows a city to develop an implementation plan, or a combination of cities with a joint powers authority. So you could have the city and the counties of San Luis Obispo County, for example, participating in a JPA. And then that JPA will solicit and develop an implementation plan to increase the renewable content locally. And San Francisco's plan, for example, is that at 50% renewable energy and energy efficiency by 2017. So it's like double the state renewable portfolio standard.
So
JPA being a joint power authority.
Thank you for that. Yes. So it allows the whoever the entity is, the city or the counties, whoever's joint powers, to buy electricity. Is that what we're talking about?
They're going to solicit bids for the power, buying the power, but also building out that distributed generation within the confines. Then you eliminate the need for the transmission coming in, so you have a lot more energy security.
So it's buying it from elsewhere, as well as the potential for building it right here in San Luis Obispo.
You're building the power generation capability, but it's a partnership between public and private, because the private sector is integrally involved as the provider of the lines of distribution and the billing and so on. So from the ratepayer's point of view, they're still interfacing with the existing power supplier.
So they're still going to be meeting in this community, what, PG&E,
Correct.
Pacific Gas and Electric. But behind the scenes, we're talking about where that energy is coming from.
The municipality or the power authority owns the energy source and is in a position thereby to change the mix progressively from non-renewable to renewable sources.
Okay.
And that's
And I think that's an important point, too. It wasn't just the community choice law that was discussed during the Smart Energy Solution, but there are many different aspects to energy use, the way we currently overuse our energy that's available, and topics that were addressed and other aspects that we covered during the conference or the summit range from vehicles and transportation implications to our energy demands and also land use. The way we build out a community has a direct implication on the amount
Sure.
of energy that we
For
suck.
transporting.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So-
And transporting of foodstuffs and agriculture. The more localized you have with your food, the less energy you're using also.
So were you talking about alternative fuels, vehicles, and so
All of the
on?
above.
Yeah.
And I think key to a lot of it had to do with the concept of regionalizing the effort. Rather than each community, there are 7 cities within the county and the county itself. So one of the key words in community choice, another word is aggregation. And when we talk about aggregation, community choice aggregation, there are 3 components to aggregation. One is the aggregating of markets, all the cities, the aggregating of the product itself, that is all the different sources of energy, and the aggregation of purchasing power. So when you aggregate in all of these areas, you realize economies of scale as well as other benefits, including the stabilization of pricing and,
Sure,
by
sure.
moving progressively to renewables.
Now let me make sure I'm not clear on this. The aggregation of sources, are we talking here again just about the generation of electricity, or are you also talking about aggregation of fuel sources for vehicles or for industrial uses? I'm talking propane here, or natural gas, or other things. Is it looking at all of that? Or did you, in the summit, you looked at many of those things, but what you're talking about with the law, the community choice law, is just about electricity? I'm not clear here.
Primarily, it's geared for electricity, and that's what the whole intent of the law. But is what you're starting to see in San Francisco. They just committed to where they want to have hybrid electric, plug-in hybrid electric. So now that would be more electricity need,
Yes.
earmarked directly for transportation. So it's not directly a transportation issue, but it comes through the side door.
Well, certainly, I know one of your speakers, Tam Hunt from Santa Barbara, is talking about, fossil fuel free by 2033, and a lot of that is migrating petroleum fuel usages towards hybrid electric or electric vehicles, which means there's going to be more demand on the electric side. But of course, you've got to deal with, can we even meet the kind of an increased need in electricity? Did that kind of come up in your summit at all? With the demand or the need for conservation, how you deal with that kind of question?
It comes up in different ways. Let me back up a second to what's happening in Santa Barbara, because they're interested in this being a tri-counties effort. Again, it's the regional approach and the aggregation of markets and the aggregation. The more we can aggregate in this area, the greater the economies of scale kick in. And also in connection with the aggregation of services and products and sources of energy, an important element of that too, I don't want to overlook, is efficiencies. Because there are efficiency services that are also aggregated. And Ken has been reminding us of this as kind of the first step in any...
Oh, sure. It's the state of California, the California Energy Commission did an energy action plan. And that action plan had its first priority is efficiency and conservation, followed by renewable energy, followed by some of the more typical natural gas power plants and other sources of energy. So the state's already said we need to follow that loading order first in our procurement.
But I think in our conference, we did talk about conservation. Under the land use panel discussions, I think, particularly when you think about how you're building and how you're going to aggregate more of your commercial and residential within existing community structures
Instead of
versus
sprawling.
sprawling all out. And also we had a panel on transportation alternatives. So there's an obvious conservation of the use of a single occupant vehicle driving around, but the likelihood and the options that are available in San Luis Obispo County today that get you out of your car, that you don't even have to think about turning the key and going to fill up at the pump.
So
Another example of the conservation and the focus on conservation at the conference was on green building.
Oh, yes.
And
Okay.
more than 30, close to 40% of the energy consumed in our country is from the built environment. And so to the extent that we can build energy efficient structures, and we have the beginnings of a very important and effective green building program right here in the county now.
So is that a voluntary program for developers and builders and architects to go towards more efficient, whatever, appliances and materials?
In its initial
Is that what it
stage,
is?
it's been planned to be voluntary. My responsibility within Slow Green Build is to promote public policy in this direction, and to do it principally from the standpoint of incentives, providing incentives, signing memoranda of understanding with the 7 cities in the county. But if we look at incentives at one end of the spectrum and mandates at the other end of the spectrum, the idea is to move progressively over time from voluntary toward mandates as people buy in, as especially the building trades buy into the concept. Because initially, we really want to get people on board. We'd like to get them on board willingly, not, forcing them to have.
Yeah, I mean, carrots are better than sticks if we can manage
There is
them.
nonetheless the sense of urgency brought on by global warming, so it's walking a fine line.
I would imagine it's, with push behind your back, the carrot here, but because it's getting worse. I mean, the news continues every week on how the effects we're already making with climate change quickly.
And the marketing is how do you push City Hall into action? So by having a broad-based community of the chamber, the Air Pollution Control District, the county, PG&E, the local utility, having the Cal Poly students and faculty become engaged, and that's transcended into them wanting to be actually involved in the development of the implementation plan, so they can live real life in the community, the development of that plan that they're learning about, and their professors are teaching them. Why not have a great school project just to help develop the sustainability for the community?
And of course, there are leaders of tomorrow, and they will live in the tomorrow that we are bequeathing them that's going to be compromised. I mean, it already is.
Yes.
We're already seeing that. So I'm glad to hear that much involvement from so many people. What kind of response? How many people showed up at the event? What kind of feedback did you get on that?
We had several hundred. I don't know the exact number, but I think there were about 400 or 500 at the conference. And we had evaluation questionnaires, feedback questionnaires that were returned. And the response in the questionnaires was overwhelmingly positive.
Good.
And one of the most interesting responses, one question was asked about the desires of people the respondents to see public policy move in the direction of energy efficiency, and in this connection specifically about getting energy elements in our general plan. And there was about 100% favorable response to that specific question. So one of the goals that we're talking about as we move from the summit to the next stage in terms of goals would be for every city in our county to have an energy element, and the county itself, to have an updated energy element which has specific goals for conservation, use of renewables, and green building. So
that sounds like, I mean, energy is not normally in general plans for county, are they? I mean,
sometimes they are, but it's hit and miss.
And it hasn't been a high priority, that's for sure. And it hasn't been something that local decision makers have used in their decisions as they move forward on a number of aspects. So
was in the summit, what was presented in terms of why the imperative, why the push? Was it the climate change point of view? Was it the notion of energy, peak oil or energy decline? I mean, what helped provide that push?
It's a mixture of economic, environmental, and social action. It's all three pillars, and they were all addressed in the conference.
Great.
You can't look at it simply as one to the exclusion of the other. And one of the really important drivers, I think, in bringing us together as a community on this, and not having this come from the environmental fringe, is that we're beginning to recognize increasingly the impact on economics that energy efficiency is having. Not just in terms of conservation, but long-term in terms of the cost of doing business, the cost of living, and also the opportunity, the business opportunities that we can bring into our communities locally.
Yes.
That's the major theme that I focus on, is the economic opportunities. Cal Berkeley just, along with 63 other economists, just came out with a $60 to $70 billion report for opportunity in the state to address reductions of climate change. So we just address the law, and it's a driver for economy. The same thing happens for renewables. Environment California, which is the former CalPERG here in California, they did a study in 2002. It showed 700% more jobs are created for every megawatt of energy that's used. If you look at a natural gas power plant as a baseline and then start installing solar, the scales go so up farther in the solar. But see, that's not entered into the mix a lot of times. They're just saying, well, what's my cost? Well, it's the overall value that brings to the community. Look at the job growth.
Yes.
Look at the training opportunities for the kids. Look at our keeping that money in the community instead of shipping it over to the Middle East or Texas.
Right.
And also, we need to look at the cost of the way we're doing business today. What are the health implications? The increase in asthma, cardiac arrest. I mean, not thinking climate change necessarily, but just the chronic exposure to air pollution. That's a component that unfortunately doesn't come up frequently enough when we try to determine the economic impacts of any of these options. We do need to start thinking more full cycle.
Because those are externalized costs, right? Because you're
But they're huge costs, and what Aeron is talking about was brought out in a report to the Sustainable Task Force for the state of California, and I think it was a 2002, 2003 report, in which the ultimate finding was that a 2% increase in investing in green building, as it turns out, in this case it was focused on green building, would result in a 20% return on investment over the life cycle of the construction. And most of the costs they were talking about had to do with productivity gains and through the reduction of health issues. And
wow,
that
20%.
came as
Anybody would be happy to have a return of 20%.
That's right, an extra $100,000 investment up front on a $5 million project would result in a $1 million savings over a 20-year period. But most of it came from productivity relating to health-related issues.
So that's sort of our lurking elephant in here, right? It's not always been in the picture.
Here's an easy one, daylighting. Daylighting in school shows that the productivity of learning is so increased, and then the reduction in energy use just with daylighting is such a low-hanging fruit that it needs to be incorporated into all designs.
Right. Wonderful. Okay, so I think we're edging ourselves over to, okay, so you've had this wonderful summit and lots of discussions. Now what? Now where are you going?
Well, the key issue, or not, I shouldn't say it's an issue, the key question at this point is how do we sustain what we got started with this summit?
Yep.
And so we're in the process right now of planning an alliance where we could keep the coalition together. And so we're framing a mission statement in this moment. And we've also set up a set of goals, initially 4 goals that have gone out to everyone on the planning committee to respond to, and we're going to develop these goals. And one of the first goals has to do with, in the draft, has to do with our own RPS standard. That is the renewable portfolio standard.
Okay.
We have a law in the state of California, a standard that was set in 2002, I think it was.
I think it was
2002, which says that every year our investor-owned utilities must increase the mix of utilities by at least 1% until they achieve a 20% renewable mix. Okay, by the year 2017, I believe it is. Well, one of our goals is to achieve, at least in the draft form, a 40% mix, which is something that a number of communities have already set as goals. In the Bay Area and in Southern California, about 20 cities have already established a 20% RPS standard. Another goal has to do, and it's related to this, with the implementation of CCA, the Community Choice Aggregation target.
And I think what's real important as we move forward, I think it was notable in our community to have all these stakeholders sitting around the table in this room actually planning the summit. And we had the Home Builders Association, the Coast National Bank. We had the Chamber for San Luis Obispo. You had government. You had some public that participated and volunteered. And we had nonprofit and environmental organizations. We had EcoSlow, Sierra Club, the Home Builders Association. That was vital to making the summit a success and to reaching such a broad array of participants. And that's what I think is so critical as we move forward with our next step, keeping that alliance whole. So we're just now in the mission statement and the goal setting, which is a critical point. We have a great foundation and a success behind us. So there's momentum to take the next step.
And I hope you really run with that momentum, I mean, to have it happen.
Well, I mean, if you take the local director of the Home Builders Association, his comment back on the first email was, how do we concretize this and put together a plan? He's thinking about plans, building, you know,
Right.
and doing that.
Right.
But he says, you know, we think we can absorb this into our business because we're seeing it that the state is already moving in that direction. We just had SB1, which says that home builders will start to incorporate solar and efficiencies into their homes and do it on a graduated scale. This gives the local home builders an opportunity to get ahead of the curve, learn it, implement it, and be ahead of the game.
SB1 is big. This is the million solar roof
Okay, the
bill, okay?
initiative, which is
And
fabulous.
$3 billion has been invested in this process. And when you think about the megawattage that is being generated by this, the potential megawattage, and it's, what is it, nominally 2,000 megawatts or something like that?
Yes.
1.2, whatever the number is.
Some
It's between
huge
one and-
amount.
Yeah,
one and
Four
two
power
thousand.
ungodly number.
Or
Okay.
power
Four
plant.
pounds
That's
worth.
how it is.
Yes,
and
okay,
you
that's
and you
good.
contrast that with the $6 billion that we spent initially to build Diablo, plus the continuing capital requirement.
Diablo, tell somebody what Diablo is.
Nuclear power plant.
All
We're
right,
talking about
you're
a
looking-
comparison between renewable investments in renewable
Give us those
to
numbers again
investments.
then.
The original nut capital requirement for building Diablo was over $6 billion.
6 billion.
There have been incremental capital requirements for dry cask storage, not to mention the operating expenses associated with it, plus the public investment in emergency preparedness. All of these costs, none of which you have when you go to a renewable source of
Sure.
energy like solar. And so purely on economic, grounds,
yes.
there is an argument to be made for moving away from the dependency on nuclear, even though, yes, it's clean, and we can all buy into the clean, but in terms of a
Clean
going
in terms
forward,
of your climate change.
Yes.
But not in terms of the radioactive materials and the illnesses that derive from that. Yeah.
that's exactly
Not
right.
clean.
And the
truly.
risk.
Right, the risk.
And the risk,
tremendous
enormous
risk to deal with the waste.
Of course, that's not been solved.
And the
So
longevity.
it's not our future. I mean, for some it would seem to be. But the lead time and the cost, what you're saying is, we've got the sunshine.
Right.
You have the wind. You have the ocean
Tidal.
near you.
Locally, they have a strong engineering department. They have a strong architecture department. They
At
have
Cal Poly.
At Cal Poly.
Yes, okay.
They have a strong urban planning department. You start to put all those pieces together with state-of-the-art that the students are learning and the professors know. You help absorb that with the community coalition that we have. We have a chance to create our own destiny.
You know,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. One thing that is a great opportunity for us is we're a relatively small county, 260,000 people in total, and a lot of acres in between us. And a lot of people choose to live here because of the great environment.
Right.
It's beautiful. We're in close proximity, or close enough proximity to the Bay Area and Los Angeles, and we're here for the most part intentionally. And I think with our coalition of stakeholders, but then also the consumer education, we need to engage the consumers, and we're hopeful that the residents here in our community live here to support those reasons. So the more we can do through the smart energy solutions, the more we can get the educators, the students, the general population behind it. That we have a better chance of bringing it home and leading an example. You know, we were the first community to stop smoking in public places in California.
Well, this is time to keep leading
Yes.
the rest of us.
So we need to continue.
You obviously care about your environment here. I can see that.
Right.
I feel
But
it.
we're learning from what others are doing, and what you're doing with Peak Moment in making available to us what others are doing helps, and certainly
The other way around.
the other way around.
And
People will be,
The community, the summit brought down to San Luis Obispo the experience of people in other parts of California and elsewhere in the country. We had folks down here from Arcata, folks up here from Austin, Texas, and well, from all other areas, and they shared with us models of what we can replicate. We don't have to reinvent things.
yes,
And-
that's exciting. That's exciting. We have 1 minute left.
Well, it's like taking something off the shelf. We're not reinventing it. We are reinventing government the way it works a little bit, but what we're doing is we're just taking existing technologies off the shelf
Yeah.
and implementing.
That,
Taking action. We're
and I
taking
think that's the
action.
clue that I'm hearing in every community is that we are not having to wait 20 years. We don't have 20 years for a new breakthrough in technology. It's here.
Right.
What's needed is the political will
Yes.
to implement it. And what I hear is that your coalition has that juice, has that fire
Yes.
to bring your community together sort of on all levels. Go
I think
for
you
it.
just saw it on the national level with the recent elections. I mean, I read the headlines today. They're going to have hearings on climate change. And if you take a look at what Great Britain just produced with the Stern Review, talks about the economics of climate change. It talks about the opportunities that will be lost if we don't address it. And it gets to a certain point where there is a tipping point that it's going to be too costly and impossible to
Yes.
put the glaciers back in certain.
The interesting thing to me is that all around the country, what we're seeing happening is local action. It's happening from the bottom up, and enormous pressure is being applied up to the state level and up to the federal level.
Democracy in action, the way it probably was intended from the grassroots. Thank you all, and I wish you well. I'm really going to be excited to come back and see where has this gone in another year or so. Thanks for joining us.
Thank
you.
Thanks.
You're watching Peak Moment, community responses for a changing energy future. I'm Genet Donaldson. Watch us next time.